welcome everybody. I would love to be on stage in person at Kiev to talk with you about this, because it's a topic close to my heart. Sadly, that's not possible due to the pandemic. So a very warm welcome in my office space. So for the next 30 minutes, feel free to hang out here with me and have a little bit of fun. As you just heard, the session is called Tools to Improve the Quality of Your Magento Project. In this case, Magento Project either refers to developing Magento modules on its own, as well as whole Magento e-commerce sites. So you can apply this to both of that. The general idea behind this session is to give you some ideas of tools that exist in the broader PHP space and bring that over to the Magento community, because my background mostly is a PHP developer. So I started developing PHP in the last century, and then at some point got kind of sucked into the Magento ecosystem. I can totally blame Ben Marks for that, and now I'm kind of trapped here, so I'll try to combine the best of both worlds. As you heard, my name is Stephan. There's really no need to pronounce my last name. When I'm not speaking at conferences, speaking at events, I do run my own company. The company is called BitExpert. We are helping our customers with their digitalization transformation efforts, either by developing completely custom applications to solve their needs, or develop e-commerce applications, or something in between somewhere. My current role is called Head of IT Business Operations. That means I'm responsible for the software delivery as well as the IT infrastructure at my company. Since I've still got some spare time left, I do not organize one, but actually two PHP meetups here in Germany. The one is called the PHP User Group Frankfurt am Main. The other one is called PHP Meetup Metropolygon Rhein-Neckar. I know that is a very German name. So if you're close to Frankfurt and Mannheim or that area, and just ping me, and it would be lovely to have you as an attendee or as a speaker at those events. So enough for the boring part. Let's talk about business. Let's talk about software quality. Now, if you hop on Wikipedia and Google for the term software quality, you find tons of different information, mostly forming two sides of one coin. So the one side of the coin is that software quality defines how well the application you've been building conforms or complies with the given design, the given functional requirements, or the specifications from the customer side. So meaning, how well did you implement what the customer really wanted? Now, if that's the thing that he really, really wanted, that's a different story. But the question is really like, how close are you to the specification? Now, to be honest, that's the boring part, right? How easy or how hard could it be to just like write some code and then figure out like what's doing? We are focusing today on the question how well non-functional requirements support the delivery of the functional requirement, things like robustness, things like maintainability, things like extendability. So that's even more of a question that is super hard to answer. Now, sad things first, I have to tell you, software quality is, unlike performance, not a layer that you can add at any point in the software development process and everything will get better. You need to focus this on the very beginning, otherwise you will end up with a lot of technical debt that you then need to solve at some point, and this can be very expensive. So meaning starting early on, it basically starts with this command, sort of. So I hope you're all familiar with Git as a version control system. So the moment we start a new project, we need to make sure that all the tools to monitor all the different requirements or metrics get executed for each of the developers every time they commit or push or whatever. Git has support for that internally with a functionality that is called Git hooks. meaning that Git exposes certain events in the user space, things like committing, pushing, receiving, and whatnot. And you can add scripts that then do something when these events happen. Now, there is nothing implemented in Git that would help you to manage this automatically. There are a bunch of tools out there in probably every programming language you can think of. Even in PHP, there are dozens of these tools. The one that we prefer is called Captain Hook. Why do we prefer it, or why do I personally prefer it? Well, mostly due to 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is I think the name is awesome. The Twitter game of Captain Hook is really amazing, doing all these pirate jokes and stuff. So that's pretty cool. The second reason is I do know the lead developer quite well, so that gives me kind of like fast lane support if something is not going the way we expect or we think it should work. And the third reason, and that's the most important reason, I guess, is its flexibility. And I'll show you that in a second. So how do you install Captain Hook? Well, it's a PHP tool, so you would obviously use Composer to apply that. Just stating Composer require Captain Hook, and this installs the base logic, so to speak. There is an additional package that is called Plugin Composer, which, as the name implies, hooks into the Composer workflow. And make sure the Git hooks will be installed after each Composer install, Composer require, Composer update. So technically, none of your colleagues should not be able to not run Captain Hook at some point. If you do that, Captain Hook will ask you a couple of questions the first time you install it. Gives you just a couple of presets, like do you want to validate your commit messages? Do you want to check your files for syntax errors? Do you want to run PHP unit? Do you want to run PHP code sniffer and stuff? And then that's basically it. The outcome of this is a JSON file, a JSON configuration, which just lists all the different kind of hooks that Captain Hook supports. And you can then edit that afterwards and enable, disable these hooks or add these actions, which are then concrete commands that should be executed in this file. The cool thing about this is that you can either specify PHP classes which do logic, or you could call any kind of external tool that you already use, just by adding the path to the tool in this action object list. So in this case, you can see you can call PHP unit and PHP code sniffer before every commit will happen. Now, what also makes Captain Hook quite flexible is that these days it does support Docker. The configuration is a bit more complex because obviously it's not that easy to do something on the host and then figure out like what to do on the or inside a Docker container. But once you figure out how things work, it's quite easy. So you define or need to define four configuration parameters. One is the run mode, where you need to set it to Docker so that Captain Hook knows that it will run in a Docker environment and need to do things a bit differently. You need to point it to a command that will be executed to run the container. So you could easily hook in there a Docker command or Docker compose. I specifically extracted that into a bash script. I'll show you in a second what it does. Now, the third option really got me the first time I set it up because I forgot to mount the .git directory from the host to the container, and then things just went nuts and I had no clue what was going on after I realized that if I want to run a Git hook inside a Docker container, I should make sure that I also have the .git directory in the container as well. So once you know that, that's cool. And last but not least, you can define a run path. So this is like, where is Captain Hook located in the container, just in case that Captain Hook doesn't figure it out himself. And then below, you list all the different hooks that you want to enable or not and add actions to run. So this bin git hook script is super simple. we just create an instance of the PHP FPM container where Captain Hook runs in, and then we execute the command that will be passed in via the Git hook on the host. So that's basically it. We use Captain Hook in combination with Mark Schust's Docker setup, and that works relatively flawless. There are a couple of tweaks that we needed to do. I blogged about it in our company blog. If you're really interested, go check that out, blog.bitexpert.de. You should find enough of information that I just can't cover in the 30 minutes that I have. What does this mean in a Magento environment? What else could we do to make things easier, big air quotes, in a Magento project? Well, you could do something like this. So there is a post merge hook, which basically means whenever you pull something from somewhere, run these commands. So what we do is we run composer install because maybe new libraries have been added to the project. We can run Magento setup upgrade just in case any module was changed and the changes need to be reflected locally. And we could also run setup DI compile if you really need to. Now, the downside of this obviously is that whenever I write git pull and I submit the command, these 3 commands will run. So that can take a while. That's a bit annoying at some point. So since a couple of releases, Captain Hook supports the notion of conditions, stating that composer install should only run whenever any of the given files that are listed below have been changed. So either if composer.json got changed or the composer.log file got changed, then run composer install. If none of these files have changed, then just completely omit that command. And that's pretty cool. So you can steer a little bit like what's going on. And that just gives you a little bit of freedom of, not waiting too long until the git push or the git pull actually has finished. So that's cool. So we got the baseline covered. So we can plug in tools into this thing, and we can make sure that it runs for all of our developers, at least if they allow it. And everything is cool. So the question is, what else do we need? What other tools are there to make sure our quality game is top notch? And a tool pretty close to my heart is this PHPStan. I really like its claim, find bugs in your code without writing tests. That really appeals to me. Just kidding. But it's true. A lot of bugs that PHP or problems that PHPStan finds, you don't really need tests for, especially any type hinting stuff or whatever. That's totally stupid to write tests for that when you have a tool like PHPStan or others, just to make sure that you got the basics right, so to speak. Since PHPStan operates on the abstract syntax tree, it knows quite a lot about your application, about the code that you have written, and the different constellations when the code is called, or what can the code and whatnot. So that's pretty neat. To install it again, we'll use Composer require PHPStan. And then we can run it. We call it PHPStan analyze, and then just point it to the different directories that should be analyzed. And the output is then something like this. Well, it's long output depending on the problems that it finds, but the gist of it is more or less that. So in this case, basically in this controller, we try to access a variable called store manager, and that hasn't been defined before. So potentially that is a problem that we should take care of. Now, the cool thing is that since Magento 2.4, PHPStan is already included in your Magento version, so you can easily run that and make sure all your code is current and cool. So there are a couple of things that PHPStan that comes with Magento 2.4 checks out of the box. Things like method should return something, but the return statement is missing. So that is a problem, obviously. It will check if the constants, or if you try to access constants that are part of a class that it does not know, it will check if at least constants are defined somewhere. It will check if all the properties we try to access are defined. That's the issue we just saw before. It will check if the anonymous functions have unused use statements. obviously should avoid that as well. It will also check arrays if they have duplicate keys or whatnot, because that obviously potentially can lead to problems. It also checks for any methods that are potentially undefined at the context the call is being made of. So that's pretty cool. So this is the baseline that PHPStan offers. PHPStan internally has this notion of strictness levels. So they range from 0 to 7. Being these checks are part of level 0. So these are really the basic ones. If you want to level up your PHPStan game, we have built an extension that does a bit more. So you can install that by requiring bitexpert/phpstan-magento. Add it to your Captain Hook configuration, just the analyze command, and then you're good to go. The other thing you need is a configuration file. It's a .neon file that in its basics just needs 2 settings. So one is this bootstraps file settings on top. This will register a custom autoloader that whenever you try to access a class that is not available, like a proxy class or factory or whatever, we will auto-generate that for you. So we don't use the Magento autoloader or generator thing. We just build it completely on our own just to be a bit quicker. And the second thing you need to add is this include statement on the very bottom of the screen, where it just there's just a couple of configuration settings defined. I'll cover that quickly. And there you can see I set the level to 7, so I'm really strict about that. 7 is not always possible within Magento, obviously. Usually we aim for something like 5 or 6, and then 7 is like really the bonus. And there I can list the paths as well, so I don't need to specify them when invoking PHPStan. So what's the difference, or what it does more than compared to Magento's implementation? Well, first of all, we had it earlier than Magento 2.4. The second thing is there's a class generator for the factory and proxy classes that is not using Magento's logic but our own, which might be a bit quicker because we just do it. We don't question anything. We have an autoloader that will load custom Magento classes. So in case like the doc block comment is completely wrong or missing, I just copy that into a separate folder and we're just going to load the classes from there instead of the Magento implementation. So just to add a little bit of extra sugar in that game. I'll try to report all of these little issues to Magento and add PRs, but sometimes it just takes a while until they got approved. We've also added support for test framework autoloaders, so you can also let PHPStan run against all the test framework classes. We got type pins for object managers so that PHPStan understands which objects you are trying to retrieve from object manager and what does it return. Support for magic method calls in the data object, for example. And pretty recently we implemented the first rules, so we can check if the service contracts and collections should be directly used by a factory are followed. You can disable these rules if they cause trouble for you, so no worries. But this is like the first try to figure out like what else could we do to make sure you can get the most out of PHPStan. Last not least, that's a good tip by my good friend James Titcomb. Ask him on Twitter. If you're new to PHPStan, no worries. Start with level 0. So the Magento preset is perfectly fine. You might run into issues. Fix those. Then increase the level to 1. Check if there are issues, fix them, and repeat until you hit level 7. There are a couple of additional strict rules extensions out there that are really strict. So if you feel eager to try those out, give it a go. And you'll definitely find a couple of bugs in your code while fixing those issues. That's interesting. Even though you know or you thought everything is fine, it probably is not in the little small details. And I guess as always, these are the important ones. Cool. So if you have never seen what PHPStan can do for you, so this is just a quick compilation that you can get just a feeling for that. So PHPStan can detect if the add param annotations in your doc block are valid. Like in this case, we are omitting the type. So that's definitely not something that should happen. It can also tell you, in this case, rule matcher get canonical rule expects a string as a required parameter, and the variable I'm passing to that method, depending on certain state, can be null. So potentially that get canonical rule method may return something wrong or do something wrong based on this null setting. So that's definitely something you would need to check beforehand, if that makes sense for you. And also things like that. So in our install schema script, we are calling table at index. For whatever reason, we are passing 4 parameters, but technically the method just accepts 2 or 3. So again, potential problem, we need to fix it, or we should fix it. There you can see there's a bunch of stuff going on, and definitely some stuff interesting for you to make sure your quality game is top notch. Moving on to another tool that I really like, it's called DepTrack. Again, a static code analysis tool, but in this time, or in this case, to ensure that certain rules for the software layer dependencies are met. I'll cover that in a second more concretely what it does. So we get it, we run it with the init command. It will create a configuration file that looks like this, and there's the whole magic. So on top we define a source path saying these are the files, please have a look at them. Exclude any test files because we don't care, and then we define our layers, saying there is a layer controller. The controller classes have the controller keyword somewhere in their name. And we have like service classes where somewhere in their name is the word service. This could be the class name or the namespace or whatever. And then we define rules stating the controller is able to access the service layer, but not the other way around. So taking this module structure for one of the modules we are building, the thing is we can set up a configuration that looks like this. So we have controllers that reside in the controller directory. We got helpers that are residing in the helper directory. We got repositories that are residing in the repository directory. And then we can finally define our roles. We can say, hey, you know what? Controllers are able to access helpers and repositories. Helpers are able to access repositories only, and repositories should access no other layer at all. If we run it now against our code base, this is the output. So first it will just gather all the information, what's going on, and then it will do the checks based on the rules that have been defined, and then it will say, hey, you have this some repository down there, and that's depending on this helper class over here, and that's not allowed. So you need to fix this. So this is pretty cool. You can use that tool basically on a module level just to check like what should depend on what else, or you can define this on an application level and say these modules could depend on any other modules. So just to make sure that you don't have a back and forth between the different modules, because just people are using the different classes they can find within their preferred IDE. My good friend Fabian Schmengler from IntelliGenNet tried to come up with configuration for a Magento module, and this is basically what he tried to do, and you can see it gets very complex from the start. So I would suggest start slowly, start easy, just add a few rules and then extend it afterwards when you see the need to. Otherwise this thing will completely blow up and be so complicated no one can ever manage it. Next up, speaking of dependencies, obviously we have Composer, and the good news, probably you haven't heard about it, I think 2 or 3 hours ago, Composer 2.0 was announced. So after the conference, you should all go out there and quickly update your Composer version, because it's a lot faster. It's really a cool tool. Again, you need to make a few minor changes probably in your JSON composer.json file. I'll cover that in our blog, again, blog.bitexpert.de. Back when one of the alpha versions came out, I sat down with Niels Ademann from the Composer team, and he guided me through about what has changed and what I would need to adapt to make sure that things are running fine. So moving on quickly before the presentation finishes, one command that I really like is Composer Validate, because that gives you a clear guidance if your log file is current to the changes that have occurred in composer.json. You really want to make sure that the log file is current, otherwise you get some older dependency versions installed and you have then no clue what's going on. You can again automate this or check this with Captain Hook. There is already an action class implemented check log file that you can easily add to your configuration, and then anytime you want to git add and commit the stuff, it will then report, hey, the log file is out of date.
Sorry,
fix that first.
for interrupting. Just wanted to remind you that there's a presentation, and then we'll get to a Q&A session.
Thank you, Yuan. I'm almost done, so that's good to know. The last thing I just wanted to quickly mention when it comes to Composer is that you should always try to detect unused Composer dependencies, because every library, every dependency that you pull in that is not needed is a potential security problem and can offer a door to hell, so to speak, if someone knows about it and how to use it. So there's a pretty cool project called Composer Unused, which you can use for that. Just download the FAR file, run it, and then it will load all the different packages it can find, compare it to the classes that are in the project, scanning everything, and then come up with the results. Stating, like in this case, okay, we've got 6 packages used, no one is unused, and no one is ignored. So in this case, we are on the safe side. Cool. So that's like dependency stuff. Last thing that I really like to cover is testing and how to improve your tests and how to make sure that your tests are good. Well, what does good mean? Basically, the ability, how good are your tests in detecting problems or faults. The idea behind Infection PHP is a technique or a technology called mutation-based testing, where your source code is taken, it will be modified slightly, and then your test cases will run against the modified version of the code. And the theory behind this is very simple. If the code is changed, it should have some side effects on the tests already written. So since the source code was changed, but not the test potentially should fail. I know that sounds a bit weird, maybe, so let's give it a quick example. So let's take this method, for example, do search. So we'll get a search criteria passed in, we'll pass it to the search helper. The search helper will either return a JSON string or an empty string. In case of an empty string, we'll throw a web API exception. So when Infection PHP takes this code, it will turn the if empty check into an if not empty check, meaning that your source code or your tests that will check that the web API exception is thrown should actually figure out, well, the exception is not thrown. We do have an issue here. And the code that actually requires the search helper to return a JSON document will figure out, wait, I get an exception that I'm not aware of. So definitely there is something wrong in this case. If neither of that happens, you can be sure that your test is not quite accurate enough and you probably have to rework it. So how to install it? Again, grab it from GitHub, infection far, just run it. It will ask you a bunch of questions. Where's the source code? Which files to exclude? Where's PHP unit located? Timeouts, where should I store the log files? And that's basically it. So just run it. It will output something similar to PHP unit. And then come up with some results in the end, giving you an idea of how good or how not so good your source code is. So these metrics are the important ones: the mutation score indicator and the mutation code coverage. So you can see in this case it's not the best and should be improved. And I think I almost finished on time. So I would like to thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, ping me later in the chat, or ping me on Twitter or wherever you can find me. So thank you very much for listening.
Stephan, yeah, so far we don't have questions, but I guess we can give a couple of seconds more. Maybe there will be some. If not, oh yeah, there is one. So does Composer Unused work well in Magento projects by default? And the second question from Simon, did you use it in live projects?
So, well, I didn't use Composer Unused currently in a Magento project. I used a predecessor, and that worked quite fine, at least in the test cases I did. I just ran Composer Unused a couple of days ago against 2 code bases of ours, and that worked quite well. But I'm not saying that it will cover each and every use case that you might have, or each and every problem that you might run into. So give it a try. If it doesn't work, let the author know. I'm pretty sure he's very helpful and can give you guidance of what to do and what not to do.
Answering one more question from Piotr. Do you incorporate those quality gateways into CI/CD pipelines, Jenkins, or any other? And the second question is GitHub webhooks or anything else?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, Git hooks can be skipped by the different developers, so you really need something on a server side, so to speak, to really make sure your quality gates are passed. We are big fans of GitLab, so we have the GitLab CI pipelines where mostly the same scripts will run, maybe something in a different configuration or whatnot, but pretty closely to that what happens on the developer machine. Also depending on the different projects, we have different strategies, like we do the checks for every push, or once everything is merged in master, or have some nightly builds. So that really depends a bit on the requirements of the different teams. But yes, definitely something on the server side. You really want to be sure that these things are run.
Thank you for answering. I believe we have no questions left, or do we? Oh, there is one more from Boris. What is your opinion with the Ground PHP?
That's an easy answer. I have none. Let me put it that way. Ground PHP, as long as I remember it correctly, it has a pretty fixed workflow, which tools should be run and how you configure things, versus Captain Hook being extremely configurable in these parts. So technically you could run Captain Hook for a Node.js project or a Java project or whatever, especially in this Docker setting, so they don't need to install anything on the host machine. Yeah, so I can't really go into details and compare them really side by side. So that's all I know.
Thank you. We do have some of the personal questions on what's written on the wall on your left.
Yes. So that's actually a poster I purchased a couple of years ago. It says, company rules: decide, take responsibility, be humble, never give up, show initiative, laugh, don't complain, find a solution, keep on learning, and some others. So
yeah,
just some guiding rules for myself to keep reminded of
what you should
what I
see
should
on a
do
day-by-day
and what I
basis.
should not
That's a
do.
very good one. Okay, I guess that was the last question for this session. If you do have some more questions for Stephan, you can easily find him in the chats, or maybe you will do the networking. And just a couple of more updates. Right now we have our big break, which is 35 minutes. And we do encourage you to visit our sponsors, Aquaboost, learn more about the companies, recruitment opportunities, and the chat rooms, as well as a networking. So you might find some new pals there. And right now, thanks once again, Stephan. That was indeed a great session and presentation. And have a good day, guys.